Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Tyler Cohen writing in Bloomberg. Tyler Cohen, econ professor at George Mason. The coronavirus killed the progressive left. When was the last time you heard Greta Thunberg's name, for example?
Oh.
The notion of very open international borders will seem strange and indeed intolerable after COVID-19. The egalitarianism of the progressive left will also seem like a faint memory. Elites are most likely to support wealth distribution when they feel comfortable themselves, and indeed, well-off coastal elites in California and the Northeast are the backbone of the progressive movement. But when they're threatened, not so ready to tell you how to live your life when redistribution of their resources also on the table. Case for mass transit will seem weaker. The massive dose of fiscal policy has now been another progressive priority, but there's general agreement on that. They're sort of arguing over the price, as is happening on the Hill right now, $1.8 trillion versus $2.5 trillion. And I just mentioned Greta Thunberg and the world's going to end in 12 years because you ate a hamburger crowd. They have been sort of shut down as a luxury we can't afford in these times, indulging the children, regardless of age, the children in terms of their intellectual output. And going back to the Hill, it's interesting because what Tyler Cohen says may turn out to be true, but there is great resistance from the resistance, isn't there? With House Majority Whip Jim Clyburn saying that COVID-19 provides a, quote, tremendous opportunity to restructure things to fit our vision. That's exactly what they're trying to do, per Nancy Pelosi's $2.5 trillion holdup, which includes $35 million to the Kennedy Center, $23 million to Howard University. Any business who obtains a loan has to provide permanent paid leave and a $15 minimum wage. Publicly traded companies have to provide stats on gender, race, and ethnic identity of their board members. Airlines have to offset their carbon emissions and publish CO2 emissions for each flight when they're barely flying right now. Sort of tone deaf. And it got Wyoming Senator Dr. Senator John Barrasso a bit up in arms during the debate yesterday.
We need to vote today, again and again and again, until we provide the relief, the rescue that the American people need. That's why we have a dozen Republicans on this side ready to speak, standing at podiums, ready to speak. And you don't right now have even a single Democrat on the floor to defend their position because it is indefensible. That's where we are. We had Nancy Pelosi flying back from California because she sent the House home a week ago. They're not here. The labor special interests. We're here trying to fight for the man and woman on the street in our hometowns, and yet they're fighting for the Green New Deal.
He's given that podium quite a workout, too, is Dr. Senator John Barrasso. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by our friend Amity Shlaes. She is the board chair of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, winner of the Hayek Prize and best-selling author of The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression. Boy, that seems more relevant than ever. And Great Society, A New History, and that seems more relevant than ever. Amity Shlaes, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, I'm always glad to be with you both.
So what's your reaction to the back and forth on the Hill between Pelosi and Senate Republicans?
Well, I mean, you might be right, and Tyler Cohen might be right that the progressive left is going to fade, but actually the agenda of both parties is kind of progressive left. You know, if Congresswoman Pelosi has New Deal, the Republicans have New Deal light in the Senate. That's why Senator McConnell said, hold your nose and vote for it. So, I think that we should say, well, this bill's going to be what it's going to be. What are we going to do in future for the next crisis so we handle this better? That's my main thought. And, you know, a lot of us are kind of kicking ourselves that we didn't give clearer advice in 2008 because it's just a replay of 2008, and that didn't work too well.
In 2008, Steve Moore and Art Laffer had an op-ed in the Journal a couple days ago. Only about 15% of the money in the $830 billion American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was actually used for roads, bridges, and other infrastructure projects. More than twice as much went to all the wealth transfer programs. And the result was that 2 years after the stimulus, the unemployment rate was still 9%.
Yes, I want to say to your listeners and to ourselves, this doesn't have to be. There is economics that is credible and was credible in the history of the world that says stimulus is not the answer in a crisis. Liquidity might be necessary some days, budget, but let's say, what do you do in a crisis? Let's ask. And here's what America did in the past. Often it would step back and leave room for the market to pick up the trouble and fix it. That's actually what happened in U.S. history. The reason I'm the chairman of the Coolidge Foundation is that Calvin Coolidge knew how to go through a crisis. I like him a lot. And he went through 5 crises as an adult, and the market would plunge down, something like it's plunging now. And then the market would pick itself back up and come back. Why did that recipe work? Real mainstream economists up till 1945 or so had explanations. And it gets at what you're both saying. The government is a rotten investor. It will invest in, solar panels as part of the recovery. It will invest in, as we saw with 2008, a lot of projects that sound nice, Green New Deal, but aren't directly economics. They're just social agenda dressed up as economics. You don't have to do that. I really wonder, Dan, what would happen to the S&P futures, or would have happened this morning if Congress had agreed that it would cut permanently the capital gains tax to 10% from 20 plus a surcharge. Every one of us, even the Marxists, will acknowledge that the Dow futures would have shot up and that the market would have gone up this morning. Why? Because foreigners are waiting to jump into the United States market. They're on their heels trying to guess the low. We don't do something like that. That's oh God, that would offend people because it sounds like a gift to the rich to cut the capital gains tax, which is the tax when you buy and sell, for example, a stock, on the profit there. That's crazy. And I want to mention one other idea if you guys have a set. Do you?
Yeah, go.
I mean, we need a reset and say, look, everyone, Tyler was right again. I mean, everyone is looking to the private sector to fix this problem. We're not looking for the NIH alone or the FDA to produce the vaccine. We're looking for companies that realize capital gains to produce the vaccine. They're in an international contest. Big Pharma doesn't seem to be the enemy at this moment, does it? We're looking for the market to go up because we want to see U.S. growth. That's capitalist too. That's what's going to save us once we're past the both in the virus part and in the market part. The second idea we've had before is to create some kind of IRA, like a 401k or an IRA for every American, and put $1,000 in there. Along with $1,000 we're handing out as quote-unquote stimulus, which people are supposed to spend, and I guess what? We all bet they won't because people are cautious, people have brains, and a lot of them are going to begin to save for hard times. So what if some of the money Americans got while they're in quarantine, hating themselves, looking at their television, going through Netflix, what if they got an account and could pick the indexes they were going to buy themselves? Well, that would be very different. Many Americans long to be in the market and are envious of people who are. And I don't think that's a crazy idea. That is, in what do we have a stake? Do we have a stake in government or do we have a stake in markets? One of the worst things about 2008 is that we rescued the big people and hurt the little people. Yes, we did.
Yeah.
So I want to mention that. And you're going to say, well, Amity, that could never pass. Amity, look, even the generous lefty package that the Senate put through isn't passing. And the answer is that's because our discussion is too narrow. You can't have this discussion in the middle of a crisis. If the Republicans never dare say cut the cap gains tax, no one's going to heed them when they try it in a crisis, right? But it may be that because the progressive left is in suspension, in shock, that this is also a market's opportunity for us to reset the United States and sound more pro-market, be more pro-market. Admit the reality. The market is going to save us, not the government.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it took a relatively long time in 2008 to get back to normal. But with this, half of America is not invested in the stock market. But when we start, things start to get back to normal, how long will it take until we get our money back that we lost?
Well, that's why I think the $1,000 that, I mean, if they're handing out $2,400 checks, which is one of the intentions that we've heard about this week, put half of that in an account and let the Americans have the stock at the bottom. Even the leftmost shows I go on, the interviewer will get a different tone in his or her voice when he thinks about him getting or her getting a little account of his own.
Okay.
What I'm saying is it's a good time to buy, right? And everyone who is rich is buying. Why not let the poor share some of that? Let the people who've never had stock share some of that and have the ability to watch the indexes ride up. I don't think handing out $2,000 is better for families than handing out one, because a lot will save. In terms of economic growth, it might be better in terms of humanitarian for a week, but in terms of economic growth and the culture of our country and the investment culture, it would be better to let people in on some capitalism at this particularly fortunate moment.
The problem is, of course, Silent Cal, who I'm a big fan of as well, didn't live in the TV age. And when you have daily briefings on a pandemic, you can't say nothing. You have to be seen as doing something. Or you use that opportunity to explain basic market economics the way that you just did, and what makes sense, and why restraint is often the better part of valor when it comes to government interventions and tinkering. But it's
one of the books we have,
wait a
go on,
second.
sorry.
All the incentives, though, all of the incentives are to mobilize the resources and the power that you have to be seen as doing something, even if it's the wrong thing, because you'll get high marks for being seen as doing something. There is no, in particular in our culture, where we want instantaneous solutions to sort of the intractable problems of the human condition. There is no incentive to exercise any restraint, to be disciplined whatsoever.
Well, the lawmakers have been telling us a little bedtime story that stimulus will always work, and the market, this is an important moment. The market so far has been telling them not really.
Yeah, right. It's true.
The market, so it might be Keynes is, this is the philosophy of John Maynard Keynes, the UK economist who believed in fiscal stimulus and also in monetary stimulus. If the interest rate is where it's at and the stock market still isn't roaring up, then this may be Keynes's last gasp, friends. That is, the Keynesian philosophy doesn't always work. It particularly doesn't work when you already have a low interest rate, which we have, and you already have what we call malinvestment, money in weird places that aren't optimal for growth. It may be Keynes's last gasp, and we may have to find a different economic doctrine. But it's remarkable what Americans can do if they're supported and have opportunities, rather than pandered to and sort of given weird tax breaks that they may not even want.
Yeah, I agree, and I appreciate your scholarship always, because you lose 100% of the arguments you don't make, and you bring forward the history that very few people know. I wish more in office had this history at their command and were courageous enough to use it. You mentioned in your piece on the topic the recession that neared and took hold in 1920 and 21. The Federal Reserve did exactly the opposite of what is being done, as well as on the fiscal side, the federal government did the exact opposite of what is being done today.
Yeah, let's give that moment some airtime for Chicagoland and National Land, your listeners, because it's so amazing. So there was inflation, a lot of inflation. Prices went up 30 or 40% in some places. And there was a sense that a downturn was coming. This is after World War I, and it was a lot of social pain because many of the vets came back with a serious injury, such as a rotting leg, and there were no antibiotics at that time. So you have one earner household with dad in pain, furious, and no job. And but the government seemed to be overspending, and a recession seemed to be coming. So what did the Fed do? It doubled interest rates. Oh my God.
Right.
It was pro-cyclical. That's regarded as a major sin in econ graduate school now. And it cut the federal government. It didn't spend more. It actually cut the federal government to let the government get out of the way of the economy. This is true, and James Grant, the author, has written a whole book about it. There was a depression. There was 17% unemployment in some places because of this. But the depression was so brief that we've called it the forgotten depression, because prices were able to find their level without intervention, and then people believed that prices were aligned with value, and they began to invest. That was it.
And when
If you say that's
and when
too old, you can also say this has happened in East Europe subsequent to 1989 as well. Whenever there's big ruction, markets do pull you out of it if you give them an opportunity to do so.
And interestingly, less than a decade later, you have another cyclical downturn. They do the exact opposite policy-wise, and as Milton Friedman has written about, as have other scholars, that deepened and extended the depression for a decade.
Right. There's a wonderful economist, mainstream, dear listener, named Benjamin Anderson. He was the chief economist of the Chase Bank at the time, and he was talking old economics, pre-Keynesian, and he said, this is what we do. The government plays God, and when playing God doesn't have the effect that is sought, the government plays God more vigorously. I can't think of a better phrase to capture what's going on right now. In 2008 we played God. In 2020 we're playing God, the government is, more vigorously, but to the same disappointing result. And he argued with 500 pages of data that are wonderful to read that the Great Depression of the 1930s was great, was large, was remembered by us with 10 years of unemployment because the government played God too much. So when I found that book, I thought, why didn't I read this in college? Why didn't I read this, at some other point? Why didn't someone tell me about Benjamin Anderson in the book Economics and the Public Welfare? Well, he's just untaught. He's forgotten himself. And there were other writers at the time and thinkers and business leaders who felt that way. We just don't know that because of the nature of the textbooks we get.
She is Amity Shlaes, board chair of the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation, winner of the Hayek Prize, best-selling author of both The Forgotten Man, A New History of the Great Depression, and Great Society, A New History. Picked them both up for all the reasons you've just heard with her scholarship. Amity Shlaes, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm thrilled to be on your show.
Thank you. And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Liberty Mutual Insurance Company presents. And Doug.
Welcome to Burger Palace. What would you like today?
Yes, I'd like to tell you that Liberty Mutual customizes your car insurance so you only pay for what you need.
This is Burger Palace. Do you want any food?